I'm sure that by now you're well aware of what the concept of crowdfunding is. It involves someone coming up with an interesting idea, and in order to make that idea come to life, they ask people who are interested in it to fund it. For me personally, one of the first websites that come to mind when I think of crowdfunding is Kickstarter. One could actually say that it was one of its early pioneers. And while it did create a lot of success stories, on the other side of that same coin, it also created a lot of horror stories. There are so many examples of disastrous Kickstarter campaigns, ones that were fully funded by the community, sometimes exceeding the goal, and yet they still managed to either underdeliver or straight up not deliver anything, with the most common reason simply being inexperience and mismanagement. One of the most infamous examples of this was back in 2014 by the massive channel at the time, the Yogscast. They wanted to make their own game and raised over $500,000 only to then fail spectacularly. They hired the wrong people, got scammed, and ended up giving a completely unrelated game to their backers as an apology instead of refunding them. It was a huge story, and their reputation never truly recovered after this. But just like how failed campaigns can be because of inexperience or mismanagement or both, sometimes you get the added bonus of extremely scummy and nasty behavior. And that's exactly what ended up happening with Puffpals' Island Skies. Marketed as an extremely wholesome and cozy game meant to compete directly with already well-established titles such as Animal Crossing. So many people ended up being charmed by this game that it had beaten its original goal by 3,300%. This was back in 2022. Today, we're in 2025. And if you go to this button that says pre-order the game, you're met with a page that says that the original domain of this game is now for sale at the very low price of $100. How the hell could this happen to a game who wanted to only raise $75,000 and ended up with over $2.5 million? And why the hell are there 5 total lawsuits currently ongoing suing the developer for almost the same amount they raised, which is $2.1 million? Well, as you might expect, this didn't happen overnight. This is a multi-year disaster that involved scamming over 42,000 backers, but also anyone they pretty much hired for this project while currently dodging multiple lawsuits. If you've seen catastrophic crowdfunding campaigns before, then trust me, this is on another level. This topic was suggested to me by a viewer in my Discord, and seeing that only a few people have discussed this, I figured that we had to talk about it. So let's do this. Alright, so here's the deal. The game, Puffpals' Island Skies, didn't just come out of nowhere. The company behind it is Fluffnest, and they were an extremely successful plushie company. It was actually founded back in 2020 and had very humble beginnings on Kickstarter, managing to raise over $170,000 as the community was very captivated by its very adorable plushies. What really put them on the map, other than their very cute plushie designs, was how quickly and effectively they were able to grow their social media accounts, accruing hundreds of thousands of followers. The person behind these very cute plushie designs was none other than Lily, and she ran Fluffnest with the co-founder, David. And I mean, look, it didn't take long. After blowing up on social media so quickly, their reputation also took off. Within the plushie enthusiast community, they were known as having high quality, soft, and durable plushies. And while they found big success within this community, David and Lily saw further opportunity in a domain heavily lacking competition: cozy games. I mean, look, just as an example, there's this one Facebook group with over 600,000 members by the name of Cozy Gamers. These people are always on the lookout for something that's cozy, and they are not shy spenders. You give them something they want, and they'll gladly give you all the money you're asking for. As an example, Stardew Valley is a game that perfectly fits their criteria, and by December 2024, the game had sold over 41 million copies, a number that can easily make multi-billion-dollar companies jealous. On the other hand, one of its few competitors is Animal Crossing on Nintendo consoles. And if we talk about the Nintendo Switch specifically with its first-party game roster, Animal Crossing New Horizons was the second best-selling game at 47 million copies, with only Mario Kart 8 Deluxe selling more. And for whatever reason, it was also breaking physical copy records, specifically in Japan, selling over 8 million units. It was undeniable at this point. This market wanted more cozy games, and they were willing to spend a lot for them. And so, as people online were never running out of good things to say about Fluffnest, like this user saying they're very high quality, honestly better than most smaller plush companies, I definitely recommend them, Fluffnest decided to tap into that reputation in order to take the unorthodox route of developing their own cozy game set within the universe of its own plushies, which they called Puffpals. They would reveal the trailer of this game to the world for the first time during the Wholesome Direct showcase. This is an indie game showcase focused on cozy games that's part of the Summer Game Fest. The game's name was going to be Puffpals Island Skies. And to say that people were excited about something that seemed to be maybe the first worthy competitor to Animal Crossing was an understatement. Fluffnest would use its already well-established presence on social media to advertise the game, and since it was directly related to its plushy universe, it didn't feel out of place. It felt just right, and it made people who were already interested in their plushies check out the game too. What would then follow is such an extremely well-executed Kickstarter campaign that you'd think you were dealing with someone who has a PhD in marketing. In reality though, you were dealing with the Wolf of Wall Street. Around April 7th, 2022, Puffpals Island Skies would officially launch its crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter with the goal of $75,000. It didn't take long for it though to completely eclipse that initial goal, and within just a couple of weeks, it would top over $1 million in funding. And I mean, if you look at this timeline here, by April 30th, 2022, they had reached $1.3 million. However, what's ridiculously impressive here is that within a week, on May 7th, they had doubled that amount, raising over $2.5 million and calling this campaign an astounding success. This is when Lily would make a personal post thanking everyone for making her dream come true. But hold on a second, let's take a step back here. Social media presence for a plushie company can definitely help with a game like this, but to beat your initial funding goal by 3,300%? How did that even happen exactly? Well, of course, there's a number of factors. Most campaigns on Kickstarters will have stretch goals. The initial goal would be to literally just make the game at its most basic form, but the more money you raise, the more features you unlock, like cooking, fishing, a free pet for all backers, and of course multiplayer at $1 million. That definitely helped with motivation for funding. What also helped is that the Kickstarter itself seemed very professionally made. You had a lot of the features already laid out as if they were already being worked on. And the fact that this was going to be not just on PC, but on Mac, mobile, and Switch as well, that made it all the more enticing. But still, it doesn't really explain why they made so much damn money. One could look at the different tiers, like how there were some that were priced at $5,000, allowing you to design your own Puffpal to be an NPC in the game, for example. Or how for $2,500 each, you could design either an outfit or a pet. Those definitely helped, seeing that every one of those tiers completely sold out. But still, there was one missing piece of the puzzle here that really helped them raise so much money in such a short period of time. And the answer to that, of course, is plushies. When I told you about Fluffnest, I wasn't fully honest when it came to their business model. Yeah, they made big, very high quality and soft plushies, but they didn't make them permanently. When one of their many designs would sell out, it wouldn't be restocked. So there was a big factor of FOMO, otherwise known as fear of missing out. As you can see, this dragon, for example, was limited edition. Once it would sell out, it would never get sold again. This is part of the reason why their business was so successful. You'd have people spend a lot of money trying to collect as many of these plushies as they could, because once sold out, they'd never be sold again. Fluffnest understood this all too well, which is where add-ons come in. You see, in a Kickstarter, you can pledge whatever tier you want, like for example, getting the game for $20, but then after having pledged, you can add add-ons to your total order. And in this case, they had quite a few plushies that were very highly sought after, sold only on Kickstarter, never to be sold again anywhere else, especially not their website. But since you could only buy them after pledging an amount to the Kickstarter campaign itself, it of course made many want to just pledge, for example, $1, or hell, buy the whole game for $20, and then add this on. And of course, the amount of money paid on the add-ons would contribute to the total pledge. So if you bought the game for $20 and a plushie for $45, your total pledge would be $65, and it would count to the total $2.5 million raised. And here's the deal, seeing that this game had 42,000 backers, all you have to do is divide 2.5 million by 42,000 and you'll see that the average pledge by backers on this game was close to $59 each. Seeing that over 30,000 of those backers paid $20 for the game or $30 for alpha access, it's safe to say that most of them bought an add-on like a plushie that truly helped this game raise such a ridiculous amount of money in such a short amount of time. It seemed like Fluffnest really knew what they were doing, to a worrying degree. This was an incredible effort and made people have the highest of expectations for this game's development. So once the campaign ended, there was no time to waste. For the next year and a half, they would encourage all backers to join their official Discord server to hang out and build a community together, and this is where you'd also be able to interact directly with both Lily and David Pentland, as we can see right here on this video call, in which they were having fun designing a tea house. They would also share some processes of the game's development, like its music production, and overall, it seemed like they were on the right track. But, as you can imagine, it wouldn't take long until they would have to face their first setback. On September 22, 2023, Fluffnest would post an update on its Kickstarter. The alpha's release date was being delayed by around a month. It was meant to come out on September 2023 and was now being delayed until the end of October of that same year. They would explain that they're doing this for design changes, implementation, quality assurance freeze, a 1-week buffer for whatever reason. But hey, even though it was a slight delay, people didn't really think much of it. And honestly, at the time, if you still wanted a refund, you could get it. Not to mention that Fluffnest wasn't just hiring just about anyone to work on this game. They had hired Room 8 Studio to do the outsourcing for, well, the majority of the game. This is a studio with many AAA games in its portfolio, so hey, Fluffnest was taking this seriously. And so the big day came. On October 31st, 2023, almost a year and a half after fully funding the campaign over 3,000% of their funding goal, they would finally release the alpha. If you were an alpha backer, you would receive a key and you'd redeem it on Steam. However, just one thing to point out before we get into the alpha itself, around a week beforehand, they wanted to confirm the participation of backers in the alpha. That way they can send them the keys. But the way they did this was in a survey format. So if you were an alpha backer and didn't see this update, you wouldn't get a key. And hell, if you were an alpha backer and filled this form out, you probably also wouldn't get a key because it was kind of disorganized. But guys, don't worry. After a couple weeks of this alpha, Fluffnest had collected its feedback and things were going smoothly. People were kind of okay with the controls, hated the camera, had a lot of feedback to give, and Fluffnest was listening. They were already ready to work on Alpha 2. Let's go! Yeah, sure, there's a few backers in the comments saying I've never received my alpha key, but whatever. They'll get it for Alpha 2, okay? Don't worry. During the first alpha, within the first and second week, they had released the Alpha 1.1 patch and the Alpha 1.2 patch. This was normal, and when the testing period had ended and they had collected their feedback, backers were expecting the next big patch to be, well, Alpha 2. But a few months had passed by, and on February 21st, 2024, they had released Alpha 1.3 with max support. There were a lot of enhancements, updates, patches, bug fixes. I mean, yeah, sure, they were taking their time and being a bit slower, but hey, at least they were doing something, right? Well, almost no one could have predicted this at the time, but this innocent post filled with many exciting updates to the game would actually be the last ever meaningful update that this game would ever receive. So up until this point, this game was great at keeping its community updated both on Discord and its Kickstarter page, not going more than 1 or 2 months without an update. But all of a sudden, since February of 2024, they had not posted anything, and the silence was deafening. People were thinking, guys, where's the game at? What's going on? And so it wasn't until August 5th, 2024, 6 months after their last update, that they actually posted something on Kickstarter, saying, "You may have noticed that we've been a bit quieter than usual with our updates. During this time, we've been doing work behind the curtains, making sure we're on the right track and refining our plans. While we may not have updates as frequently as before, we want to assure you that progress is being made. Although some details are still being finalized, we're excited about the direction we're headed and we're committed to sharing important milestones with you. Thank you for always having our back, and we can't wait to show you what's next." With a cute little pleading face emoji. Aww. They would then go ahead and showcase some things they've been working on, like the fishing minigames, the Puffpals themselves in the game, how they're gonna look. But as you can see, for the majority of this post, it was mostly just concept art. They only showed off one biome and some little aspect of the UI, but then the other half of this post was the community corner where they talk about stuff happening in the Discord server. It was a very lackluster update for having waited 6 months. Some backers said things like, "Finally, I've been waiting for an update for ages. Thank you for the update and hopefully it'll be more frequent." It was definitely weird that they all of a sudden took 6 months off like that, only to come back with such lackluster updates, but hey, people were still hopeful and optimistic. I mean, after all, this game raised so much money and was backed by a successful plushie company. But much to their disappointment, the silence would begin again. And they would only receive another update yet another 4 months later on December 12th, 2024. And this time, it wasn't an update like the last one, it was a statement written by the CEO and co-founder David Pentland, where he would say, "Hey everyone, we know you've been eager to hear more about Island Skies, and we appreciate your patience as we've been navigating important internal changes. First, the game is still coming. This has set us back, but we expect to be able to maintain our original timeline within a few months. Below, I'll outline a bit of why we've had to stay so quiet and when we can expect things to improve. Following issues at the start of this year, it became clear that we needed to change how our team works. Part of this process was adjusting our contracts with the people working on the game to empower them beyond what their current contract supports. In the previous form of the contract, roles and deliverables were too specifically outlined, exposing team members to legal risk if they go outside or beyond their mandate, which for obvious reasons can introduce inefficiencies. All parties were entirely supportive of this change from the start, and there has been no conflict over the terms of the agreement. However, changes like this often involve legal hoops to jump through and boxes to check. This process is taking much longer than initially anticipated, and our current contract limits our ability to share anything until things are final. Whether it's content produced for the game, details about the reorganization process, or updates to the alpha build. Watching the frustration of the community without being able to communicate what's been happening has been the most difficult part of making Island Skies so far. Our team is eager to show you what we've been working on, and we know it's hard to wait for updates during this time. That said, these changes are necessary, and we will always do what needs to be done to make Island Skies a reality and the best game it can be. I'm very happy to have gotten the green light from all the lawyers involved to finally share this update and to be close to finishing up this process. We're planning to bring you another update like this by the beginning of February to share where things stand. Thank you for being with us through this. We're wishing you a happy holiday season, and we can't wait to share more with you in the new year. Signed, David." Whoa. What the hell was going on? But more importantly, how is this the backer's problem? This statement felt like David was just venting about legal issues he was having at his company without giving anyone any meaningful updates on the game itself. It just felt out of place. The community this time was not as supportive as the last update. They were disappointed with how little they were being communicated with, and a lot of them started getting very worried. Where's this game headed? It's been a long time and we're still on Alpha 1.3. Nothing has been changed in the game itself. Nothing has been shared except a few pieces of concept art. And this is when people, just like this person here who's pledged $225, would start asking for refunds by emailing reports@fluffnest.com. This very professional and successful plushie company was losing all the goodwill it had garnered and used to make this game's funding possible. But we were only still at the tip of the iceberg. Around 3 weeks before this very disappointing update by David, Fluffnest would announce a Black Friday sale in which you could get 25% off its entire Puffpals roster. Seeing that 25% is a large discount and the fact that many of these plushies won't be sold again, people would naturally jump at the opportunity to buy them. As a reminder, Black Friday typically occurs around the end of November. A month would then pass, and by the end of 2024, you start seeing more and more people complain about the fact that their shipment still hasn't arrived, even saying that Fluffnest had overcharged them for shipping. You'd start seeing many stories like this user here saying that this happened to them and that they have been emailing them for over a week to get a refund and that they never responded. They even detailed how for larger plushies they used to pay $9 for shipping, and for this Black Friday sale they were charging $25. So by this point, Fluffnest's reputation wasn't just being affected by the game's disastrous communication, it was being affected by its once great plushie business, period. And just as people were starting to understand that Fluffnest seemed like they were slowly falling apart, a user had found that the trademarks for Island Skies and Puffpals had been inactive for over a year. But this was far from being the only thing that people had discovered by that point, because they would discover another bombshell. The fact that Puffpals Island Skies was outsourcing the entire game to Room 8 Studio. Why is that a problem? Well, because it was never communicated, and Puffpals made itself out to be something made in-house by showing us this very cute little drawing of their team. Anything from a programmer to game designer to a 3D modeler to an animator to a concept artist, while even listing some additional people they were receiving help from, most likely contractors, in different domains. This post was made in January 13, 2025. This was the first time some people were realizing that most of this game was outsourced. The fact that Studio 8 was literally the creator of Alpha 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3 was still news to the majority of this community. So much for transparency and communication, right? So as people were confronting the fact that they've been lied to by Puffpals Island Skies and that they were being scammed by Fluffnest and its plushies, they would finally receive another update on February 8th, 2025 on the Kickstarter. It would say, "We're here to let you know that the next alpha update, Alpha 2, is almost ready to roll out. We're finishing up some final adjustments to make sure the islands are in working order before we announce the official Alpha 2 release date. This next phase will bring new content and features to the game, and we're incredibly excited for you to play through it. We'll be sharing the Alpha 2 date and more detailed information about this update soon. We appreciate your patience as we get everything prepped and ready. We are super excited to get into this next testing phase and hear everyone's feedback. It's been a journey, and we hope you'll enjoy what we've created so far." They then talk about how they're not sure of dates yet, how long Alpha 2 is going to last, when early access is going to be, when the full release is going to be, pretty much saying that they're winging it. And then they would say, "Looking ahead, we're working to establish more consistent communication with you. Our goal is to get back to providing regular updates after Alpha 2's release." So overall, it seemed like everything was hinging on Alpha 2, its release date, and its success. This would maybe allow Puffpals Island Skies to recuperate some of the trust they had lost over the last few months, and maybe even prove to some people who had already given up on the project that it's still slated to come out one day. But of course, they were met with the majority of their backers casting doubts on the fact that this is going smoothly, and some even questioning why the lack of updates. David had explained in December that it's due to restructuring contracts, but how does that make any sense? Why would updates stop just because you're reworking contracts of your employees, which weren't really your employees because you outsourced this entire game to Studio 8? Things already weren't making sense at all. The Discord server wasn't any better because for the duration of this silence that occurred throughout 2024, the only updates they'd have is new Puffpal plushies. But hey, to be fair, just 19 days later, the game would have another update on its Kickstarter. Maybe they actually meant what they were saying. Maybe their communication was actually going to be regular now. They would again start off by saying that they apologized for the long gaps in communication, that there were external factors that prevented them from sharing information earlier, saying that they recognize how much this has impacted trust in the project and led to uncertainty with the Island Skies community. We truly appreciate your patience as we navigate this project. Alright, so what's the deal here? What is the current state of the game? They would say, up until now, we were restricted from providing updates to the community. That period has come to an end, and we are excited to summarize some of the changes we've been working on. We had hoped to have an Alpha 2 build ready alongside the lift of the information embargo, but that did not happen. Instead, we will summarize the changes here, and we'll bring you more information as we get closer to Alpha 2's launch. And then, this is when they would hit you with a big slap to the face with something that was completely unexpected. Island Skies is migrating from Unity's game engine to Unreal Engine for many small reasons. Unity's payment model change did not factor into this decision. This change has improved performance and made development move more quickly. This process started in December 2024 and is currently in progress. So all of a sudden, within 3 years of this campaign concluding on Kickstarter, they decided to switch engines. Okay, not a small feat by any means. They would then outline a bunch of features, but honestly, without images, without actual videos, you can't really believe them at this point. They then said to expect Alpha 2 within 6 to 8 weeks, so April 2025 by the latest. They would then say that by mid-2025, they would want to release early access for everyone, and then the full release would be at the end of 2025 or at the end of 2026. It would fully depend on early access feedback. But then there was a big question, which they answer, which is, why has communication been so limited? They would again reiterate that there were external circumstances that prevented them from sharing updates, but they wouldn't specify, like what external factors, what's going on exactly. They would then again say, hey, communication is going to improve, expect more stuff in Alpha 2, regular updates, community feedback, with polls, discussions, etc. They've already said that a million times though. But then, this is where things would get interesting in this little update. Have any legal issues impacted production? They would go on to say, the legal issues that have primarily impacted our ability to communicate openly with our backers had a relatively smaller impact on production and are no longer ongoing. But the legal issues that impacted our ability to communicate openly do not include the lawsuit filed against Fluffnest last year by Blade Funding, which was not related to Island Skies or its funding and did not and could not have had an impact on production. They would then specify two very important things: that there are currently no outstanding legal issues that could disrupt the game's development, that they had solved things with Blade funding, which was impacting something more related to its plushie business, and finally, that there are no financial issues with the project, saying funding has never been a concern for the game's development. And we've been very intentional about how we manage finances to ensure that Island Skies remains secure. The way we've structured things has fully protected the game from risk or litigation up to this point, and we're confident in that approach. Okay, cool, and they would even specify that you can get a refund if you wanted to by emailing info@fluffnest.com. So look, at this point, if I was a backer, this wouldn't really make me feel that good. My feelings can be summed up with this backer's comment saying, "Oh boy, each time a Kickstarter does an engine change, it means it will never come out. Unreal is a freaking pain for optimization." And that's the thing, you want to release your game on multiple platforms, including mobile, you typically go with Unity. Unreal Engine has a reputation of running like shit, and doing this so late into development. It was just red flag after red flag at this point. But hey, you know what? They had given us a date. For the first time in forever, the timeline for the Alpha 2 is going to be 6 to 8 weeks. Fine. What's the harm in waiting a couple more months after having waited more than 2 years to see what would happen? What's the harm, right? Well, more than you can imagine. Just a few days before that update got posted, the Fluffnest website would go down for multiple days. People would then look deeper into the lawsuit with Blade funding and find out that the reason why they were being sued is because they weren't paying back any of the debts they took on for their business. Now, in the Kickstarter update, they said it was a banking issue, but seeing that they hadn't shipped any of the orders from Black Friday 2024 yet and were overcharging shipping, that was getting very hard to believe. But hey, you know what? At least the game was keeping its promise of quick communication, because only a couple weeks after their last update on March 13th, 2025, they would post another update saying that Alpha 2 was right on track, detailing their process of moving everything from Unity to Unreal, and admitting that yes, in the short term, this will impact production. In fact, we lost about 4 months of development time to make the switch since we had to rebuild and rework a lot of the systems. However, since moving to Unreal Engine, development has been running either at the same pace or even twice as fast depending on the feature. And ending this by saying that they'll check in with another update like this one on April 3rd, no matter what. So you know where we're at. But yeah, of course this sounded too good to be true, because on March 23rd, 2025, a user would make this post on the Cozy Gamer subreddit saying, "To anyone that has requested a refund of their backing for Puffpals, I requested a refund on February 28th, which they apparently did not see. It's honestly whatever at this point, but did contribute to my patience meter, and then another one on March 5th. It came through this time, thank fucking God, and there was some back and forth regarding the email addresses, checking if everything was correct, all good. It is now March 23rd and I have yet to receive my refund. As you can see, my patience is slowly but surely running out." They would then ask others if they've been through the same experience, then posting an update saying that they know someone that requested a refund as early as January 18th, 2025 and has still not gotten a refund. More comments would corroborate this, saying that they either got ghosted or that they got a reply, gave their PayPal, and never received their refund. It seemed like Puffpals' claim of them not being in any financial trouble and being financially stable was yet another lie. And speaking of lies, their next update would be on April 17th, 2025. They said that Alpha 2 is still on track to release in the same exact time frame, and they would show off some new UI elements, ending the statement by saying you'll hear from us again with another quick update like this on May 1st. But while people were patiently waiting for this next update, something else occurred. Around April 2025, Fluffnest's website would go back up and they would have the gall to hold a clearance sale. This user would post on Reddit and say that it's been over 43 days and his order didn't even ship yet. What's going on? Well, it turned out that just a few days ago, on May 1st, 2025, people would find out that not only did Fluffnest fire every single one of its employees, but that it was going out of business permanently. Yes, that once very successful plushie business, which went viral on social media and was known to have very high quality products, was just like that, shutting down. This news would be shared on their Fluffnest Discord server, and one of the first things they would say in their statement is that Island Skies production is secured and will not be affected, but that they would have to halt all operations related to their physical goods. This was their reasoning. Over the past few years, rising shipping costs significantly stretched our resources. Although we tried to absorb these costs without significantly raising prices, the final shipping invoices we received earlier this year were much higher than anticipated, creating a major financial shortfall. We explored several solutions to address this shortfall and to minimize customer impact, and until very recently, we believed we had viable paths forward. However, in the weeks following the recent announcement of tariffs on goods from China, it became clear that the situation had changed, and there was no longer a viable path forward for Fluffnest's plushies. At the same time, we've been working through refund requests for plush orders awaiting shipment and from customers unhappy with Island Skies. We expected this could create some issues, but the volume of transactions seems to have created much larger issues than this has in the past. This would not be critical on its own, but combined with everything else going on, it has quickly left us with no options. They would end this by saying that they're not able to take any new refund requests anymore, but that they would still be honoring all pre-orders. I can't imagine how shocked I'd be, not just as someone who had pledged for the game, but as a fan of their plushies. This was so incredibly sudden. But the surprises weren't going to stop anytime soon. A couple weeks later, on the 19th of May, people would also find out that Fluffnest has not only permanently shut down, but that they got rid of their entire mod and customer service team, which was also serving Puffpals Island Skies. And at the same time, David in the Puffpals Discord confirmed that due to the situation happening with the plushie company, refunds for Puffpals Island Skies would be halted. At this point, this entire business was collapsing faster than anyone could have ever predicted, and they didn't know what to think anymore. They were told repeatedly that Puffpals Island Skies was not financially affected by any of this, that it had all its finances secured, but it was very hard to believe at this point. For fans, this was a time of complete and utter uncertainty. People wanted concrete answers as to what would happen to their orders and the game they backed, but they couldn't find info anywhere. It would only be on May 21st, 2025 that Fluffnest would post its last ever update on the state of Puffpals Island Skies. Here's what they had to say. Hello everyone. The development of Island Skies has been incredibly challenging, to say the least. For the past few years, we were under NDA with a third-party studio and couldn't discuss many of the things happening behind closed doors. However, now that other parties have made some of that information public, we can speak more openly about what's happened. After the Kickstarter, Fluffnest entered into a milestone agreement with Room 8 Studio to develop the features necessary to deliver early access based on the GDD we created for the campaign. The agreement was for $1.1 million over the course of 1 year. This would leave around $500,000 of wiggle room, as approximately $1 million from the Kickstarter went to taxes, fees, campaign expenses, and the production of physical goods. Even though plushies weren't included in any of the tiers, add-on plushies were still counted in the campaign total. We couldn't have been more excited to make Island Skies, and we wanted to bring in as much experience and assurance as possible. This is when they would detail production issues and management changes. While everyone at Room 8 directly working on Island Skies was passionate about the project, problems with the studio's management became apparent during the first milestone. The game wasn't ready for early access or even for alpha. Because the agreement was designed to protect Fluffnest from cost and time overruns, any revisions or changes had to go through an approval process that significantly slowed down production. Toward the end of the first milestone, Room 8 made staffing changes in upper management and proposed a switch to a time and materials contract to avoid the rigid structure that had caused delays. At that point, we had three options: continue working with Room 8, end the agreement and take on the project ourselves, or partner with a different studio. So they decided to stick with Room 8, at least through Alpha, so that they could deliver Alpha 1 in 2023 and reassess. They would then say that getting to Alpha 1 required an additional $1.5 million in production, mostly funded by an SBA loan we secured in early 2023 for both of our plush business and game development. So already this is a disaster. You raised $2.5 million, half goes to taxes, and for whatever reason you thought it'd be a good idea to use $1 million for just the first year? Even a child learning basic math can see that this is a disaster. They would then say, following the changes in Room 8's leadership and a ramp up to Alpha 1, we were hopeful. However, while Alpha 1 marked progress, it didn't meet our expectations. Early access was still far off, and costs were rising. We planned to use the remaining SBA loan and plush revenue to continue funding development while taking on more work ourselves to manage costs. Unfortunately, after the 2023 holiday season, the financial situation got worse for Fluffnest's plushies. In early January 2024, we realized our funding plan wouldn't cover future game costs, and circumstances took the decision out of our hands. We informed Room 8 that we wouldn't be able to pay for continued services in a timely manner. We expected them to pause services following this communication, but instead they continued working and invoicing even after meetings where Fluffnest requested that they pause work to avoid accruing additional debts. So even though they are complete imbeciles when it comes to financial management, here they're alleging that Room 8 held them hostage. But of course, this is without them detailing how much they had already owed Room 8 when they informed them that they couldn't pay the continued services. If you thought this was already bad, well, wait till you hear this. During this time, we sought other funding options, including from interested investors. However, the alpha's quality and Room 8's continued work at Fluffnest's expense negatively impacted negotiations. Throughout 2024, we continued to negotiate with Room 8 and reached a tentative agreement to switch from a work-for-hire model to a profit-sharing arrangement. However, because of our SBA loan, the new agreement needed to be underwritten and approved by the SBA. While preparing for this process, we discovered significant accounting irregularities that delayed submission and posed an existential risk to our plush business. We were unable to recover the plush side of the business. It took several months of blood, sweat, and tears before we were finally confronted with the reality that the plush business was no longer sustainable. This was a deeply painful realization and one that only became clear very recently. But after replacing our accountant and undertaking significant and costly legal and financial work throughout 2024, we were finally in a position to proceed with the agreement by early 2025. What? What do you mean accounting irregularities? What do you mean you fired your accountant? David, the guy who's probably writing this, is the CEO. How are you unaware of the terrible financial situation that you're in, man? They would then say where things stand now. As we approached finalizing the new agreement, it became clear that Room 8's senior management does not have a clear understanding of the project's current state or how much work remains. Because of this, we can't trust that the issues we've already faced won't reoccur. We informed Room 8 that we won't proceed unless their leadership presents a plan that directly addresses these issues and commits the necessary resources to Island Skies. In the meantime, we've continued working on the game ourselves. Based on our experience, we don't currently trust Room 8 to deliver a version of Island Skies that meets our standards. So hey man, that's wonderful to hear, but what do you mean we've continued working on the game ourselves? For the last 3 years, Room 8 has been doing everything. What are you gonna do? Like, what the fuck? They would then end this with, looking ahead. Despite everything, we are continuing to push toward Alpha 2. We remain fully committed to delivering the game we promised. While we can't provide a date, our focus is on development, quality, and our own well-being. We'll share another update as soon as we have a firm release date for Alpha 2. Thank you for your patience and support during these turbulent times. With love, Fluffnest. And with that, this would be the final update that the backers would ever receive. And within just 24 hours, the community, being understandably very outraged and seeking more answers, while displaying their discontentment, would get silenced by Lily, to the point where she would even delete the general chat channel in their Discord server. Some of these disgruntled users would move their discussions to another channel, and guess what? That channel would also get purged too. A month later, around June, people would realize that the address info@fluffnest.com used to refund the game or plushies would just disappear. It didn't exist anymore. And now, when you go to the over 8,600 comments on the Kickstarter page, it is littered with people requesting refunds. And of course, that one guy selling his account with Puffpals Alpha in it for $5,000. I mean, come on, man. This whole thing was a catastrophe on an apocalyptic level. From an incompetent CEO to a community that was backstabbed to even Lily, the artist that made these cute designs, also participating in the whole silencing movement on Discord. Of course, when this initially happened, people still had many questions. How did it come to this? Well, throughout the second half of 2025, we would start receiving many answers in the form of lawsuits directed towards both Fluffnest and David himself. The same lawsuits that want over $2.1 million in damages. And it would be here that we truly find out that this wasn't just mismanagement or inexperience, this was scummy, malicious behavior from the very beginning. Alright, so here's the deal. Typically, when you make a purchase with a credit card, you have a chargeback time limit. This is independent from the vendor itself, so in this case, Kickstarter. You can call up your bank and ask them to reverse a transaction on your credit card. Legally, this works perfectly if you bought something and it wasn't delivered. In this case, the game wasn't being delivered. But as you can see here, you typically have a chargeback window, with the maximum being PayPal offering a chargeback even after 180 days. The problem though was that most people had bought their pledge in 2022. It had been years. But this limited time window can be bypassed if the company that you paid to provide a service for you declares bankruptcy. So even though a bank will have like a 60-day window for you to charge back, if they see that the company you're talking about is facing bankruptcy, they'll refund you the money because, I mean, come on, they're not going to give you anything, they're facing bankruptcy. The problem here, though, is that Fluffnest, even after shutting down its plushie business and admitting financial problems, even with its game, has not filed for bankruptcy. This means that for most backers, they can't initiate a chargeback with their bank because the bank will see that this company's not bankrupt. This, of course, is done on purpose. It's not a coincidence. Fluffnest knows what it's doing. That's why they're trying to hold out declaring bankruptcy for as long as possible. But this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to their scummy behavior. On July 3rd, 2025, David Riono, a concept artist that had worked for the game as a contractor, would make this post on the Puffpals subreddit, detailing that he had worked from 2022 to 2024 around 30 to 50 hours a week making concept art for the game. He would say that payment delays were a regular occurrence, but that he would always end up getting paid. In fact, the CEO himself, David Pentland, was in charge of paying him. He would tell us a story in 2023 where he really needed to be paid as soon as possible to pay his rent, and the CEO made sure to pay it the next day. Hey, that's pretty cool, right? Well, around a year later, on May 2024, he was told that they wouldn't need his services anymore. More specifically, they couldn't afford to keep him on the project. They specified that. The artist was devastated, but not exactly surprised. He sent them the last invoice to wrap everything up, but at the same time, he was also still owed money for March, April, and now May of 2024, with the total amount being over $12,000. The artist did confess that some of the work he had done was a bit extra, going the extra mile, so he did edit his last invoice and the final owed amount was $11,410. That was several months of rent and expenses, and of course stress began to eat at him. He would keep emailing the team asking for payment, and he would receive reassuring replies like, hey, the money's coming, don't worry. But of course, the money never came, and the guy had to move back in with his parents. He was ruined financially pretty much, and it took him years to recover. After getting his life back together, he decided to sue Fluffnest and David Pentland. But he would detail what he's struggling with right now. David is refusing to be served anything. You see, getting served is a necessary and extremely important step in suing someone. It means that the person you're suing has received notification that legal action is being taken against them. But for that, they need to be tracked down. They need to be actually handed the piece of paper. If they don't have a permanent address, if they're not in the country, if they're fleeing and doing it on purpose, then technically speaking, they can dodge being served for as long as possible and not face consequences. This was exactly what David Pentland was doing. He was dodging any accountability and making sure that no one could find him to serve him the lawsuit that his concept artist was trying to present him. Again, extremely scummy behavior. But the good news is that there's been a few updates in this lawsuit with David Riono and David Pentland, and in order to get all this info, I joined the Discord server called Fluffnest, which mostly comprises of people who had backed the game on Kickstarter and became refugees once they got banned off the main Discord or left it because of the crazy silencing treatment they were being given. So David Riono's case was actually filed on April 16th, 2025. Initially, the hearing was meant to take place on the 6th of June, but it had to be moved until the 21st of July because no one was able to serve David Pentland. David Riono requested the court to allow him to serve David Pentland via mail or by publication in like a newspaper or similar, but a couple of weeks later, the judge denied that request, which was very weird. But the good news was that on the 9th of July, David Riono was finally able to somehow serve David Pentland. It worked out. And on the 22nd of July, the hearing took place. David Pentland did not show up to court. David Riono argued his case. And within 2 weeks, judgment was entered. This image, of course, is from the Fluffnest Discord. The court ordered Fluffnest Games to pay David Riono a total sum of $11,535. But that was far from the only lawsuit. Remember Blade Funding, the ones who gave the business loan to Fluffnest? Well, in Fluffnest's Kickstarter update on February 27th, 2025, they specified that them being sued by Blade Funding was only due to a banking issue and has since been settled, while of course adding that there were no financial issues with the project. Well, it turns out that for once, they weren't lying. They did actually settle with Blade Funding. But by settlement, it didn't mean a handshake. It meant that they had to pay them an amount of money, and Blade Funding agreed to that. They were meant to pay them a total sum of $98,000 and just stop paying at some point. Because of that, Blade Funding would sue them again. And lucky for them, the verdict would come very quickly. The judge would order David, Lily, and Fluffnest in general to pay back the sum of $98,000. Not a small amount by any means, and this judgment was entered on May 15th, 2025. But hey, don't worry, at this point I'm a lawyer channel because we're not just talking about Blade Funding, we're also talking about another company claiming the same thing happening to them with Fluffnest by the name of Funding Futures LLC. On the 12th of May, they would file a commercial trade contract lawsuit against Fluffnest, and guess what? They would also win their case. The judge would order Fluffnest to pay the sum of $69,000. I mean, at this point, the money just keeps racking up, baby. Guys, David Pentland is one of the most shameless people I've ever seen. The guy took out loans from just about anyone, including American Express National Bank. They had also filed a lawsuit against him on March 4th, 2025, and it's still ongoing. The first hearing was on the 6th of August, but of course, David didn't show up, only American Express's lawyer. The next hearing was scheduled for the 3rd of November, so look, I can't predict the future, but I'm pretty confident that David is not going to show up to that one either. And finally, remember our good old friends Room 8 Studio, the guys who pretty much had worked on the entire game by themselves? Well, they're also suing Fluffnest and David Pentland. It was filed on the 16th of May, 2025, and they are seeking $1.9 million. That is pretty much like their entire Kickstarter fund at this point, man. The story in their lawsuit would actually be very different from what Fluffnest had to say about them. Surprise, surprise. From their point of view, Fluffnest was coming from the beginning. When Room 8 had found out that they couldn't pay them anymore, instead of finding a solution, Fluffnest would keep delaying and obfuscating what was actually going on behind the scenes. And one of the craziest accusations in this lawsuit is Room 8 saying that David Pentland had threatened to bankrupt his company on purpose so that he can't pay Room 8 legally anymore. Saying that he had openly flexed this in his Discord server, saying that he would just withdraw all the money from Fluffnest Games, put them into another entity, claim that Fluffnest Games is bankrupt, and just not have to pay Room 8. Like, how stupid can you be, man? Another thing that David had said in his post on Kickstarter was that Room 8 would continue working on this game without his approval, that he had tried to stop them because he couldn't pay them anymore. Well, from Room 8's point of view, he kept approving everything they were doing, never telling them to stop. This is why for Room 8, this was more about just the money. They also wanted the full rights of Fluffnest Island Skies so that they could keep working on it and release it to the public one day, which is pretty significant. Now, just to be clear, in this initial lawsuit, they weren't suing David directly, they were only suing Fluffnest. On the 27th of May, David would be served, and on the 30th of May, Room 8 would update their lawsuit. Now, they're not only just suing Fluffnest, they're also suing David Pentland directly as an individual. As you can see right here, David Pentland, an individual. At this point, David and his lawyer had until the 9th of July to file a response. And they did, 7 days late. Now, I just want to specify something just for you to understand. The initial lawsuit by Room 8 was 22 pages long, and as you can see, had a lot of text. David Pentland's response was literally one-liners. Like, yeah, whatever, let's just get it over with. And at the end, it would say that the defendants, so David and Fluffnest, are requesting that the court dismisses the complaint and denies all relief to Room 8, making Room 8 pay for the lawyer fees that David is paying for this, and to award him anything else that the law dictates for having to inconvenience him to respond. This is the most tone-deaf thing I think I've ever seen. Like, I don't even cover law, like I don't even read lawsuits, but dude, this is ridiculous. If I was the judge, I would have a stroke reading this. Room 8 would counter that statement and say, no, we're 100% suing you. We're not going to take any bullshit. David's lawyer would respond again, hoping to be able to dismiss this, and he wasn't able to do that. The trial is now officially scheduled to be on April 2027. Unfortunate that it takes that long. I mean, that's a ridiculous amount of time to wait. But I think it's safe to say that if they actually wait that long, David by then would have probably been homeless. So, I mean, this is an easy win for Room 8, but is it really? Because they'll never see that $1.9 million ever again. But some fans are still hoping that by then Room 8 would get the rights for the game and maybe they'll get to see it. Additionally, Fluffnest.com still exists to some degree, but on the 8th of February 2026, it'll expire, and I don't see anyone renewing it. And when it comes to the website that redirects you once you click on the pre-order the game button on their Kickstarter, I'm currently in the process of buying it. I already paid the money. The transfer of the actual domain to me does take a while though. But if you're watching this video maybe a few days or more than a week after I published it, make sure to go there because I'll have a surprise for you. All right? Oh man, overall, I mean, this whole thing is such a catastrophe. It's crazy how someone like David was allowed to even touch this much money. And it's unfortunate that Lily, the person behind this very wholesome art style, was also involved. Now, there has been some rumors without evidence that Lily had spent $18,000 of this money to buy like an adult-themed VTuber model, but I couldn't really find any evidence pertaining to that. Not that it would be hard to believe. But overall, I also find it interesting that only David is being sued by Room 8 and other companies, while Lily, for the most part, has been able to avoid most of these lawsuits. But in the end, what I keep thinking about are the 42,000 backers and this promise of a cozy game that they've been denied. Not to mention that some people are still hoping that this promise of pre-orders still being delivered actually happens. Look, it sucks to see anyone get scammed, but I don't know, I guess it hurts a bit more seeing that these people just wanted a wholesome game. They just wanted something cute to fawn over and play after like a long day of work or something. Instead, they just got scammed in broad daylight, and I don't even know if David's gonna actually have to face consequences. He just keeps running away. I just hope that they get the justice that they deserve and can find a game even better than this absolute train wreck. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I really appreciate it. And if you want a great alternative to an energy drink that has flavors such as Grandma's Ashes and Titty Milk, I'm not even joking, these are real flavors, make sure to go to GamerSub specifically on September 26th because they'll be dropping their new collection, Fixed Me, in which where you buy a tub like Grandma's Ashes, you get a free shaker cup. And it's a really good looking shaker, usually worth $25. All you have to do is use my code Mujin at checkout and you also get 10% off your total order. You'll find the links in the description and the pinned comment, and trust me, unlike Puffpals, you won't get scammed here. Anyway, I love you so much and I'll see you in the next video whenever that is. Mwah!